On March 27, 1977, a terrorist incident at the Gran Canaria Airport in the Canary Islands injured 8 people. The incident prompted the diversion of several large aircraft to the Los Rodeos Airport, now named the Tenerife North Airport. But I'm actually not going to tell you about that terrorist incident. Instead, I'm going to tell you about how that bombing led to the worst aviation accident in history at an entirely different airport. This is the Tenerife Airport Disaster. Welcome to Calamity Janes. I'm Madison.
And I'm Bailey.
And we are your hosts, co-hosts, whatever.
With the most.
With the most. This is our podcast, Calamity Janes, where we talk about disasters, mayhem, calamity. What are we, two anything but plain Janes, sisters, best friends, all of that good stuff. So if you want to talk about horrible, awful things with your best friends, you've come to the right place.
You sure have. Now, I do need to address, if these outfits look familiar, these ensembles, you might have just watched our apology episode where we apologize for not having an episode the previous week. Yes, we know we did not have a costume change planned. We apologize for that too, but we thank you for coming back to us again for another episode. Madison, that intro was bananas. I am my curiosity is piqued. Who are you looking at off camera?
Walking slower doesn't make it better. You take those Cheez-Its upstairs and I will end your life. Oh my god.
We have a threat here, live on the air.
It's fine. Brian is staying upstairs because it's very hot upstairs. Our air conditioning is not great. It's been very warm here in Omaha, so I can hear the bag.
Tense. I can feel the tension.
Anyways, it's really hot upstairs, so I'm recording downstairs today, which is why my space has been uninterrupted by Cheez-It thieves.
I did notice you had a scenery change as well.
Yes, yeah. So anyways, yes, sorry for the lack of costume change. This is my outfit of the day.
I think we look great. Oh, I'm not apologizing for what we're wearing. I'm just addressing the similarities.
Yes.
We make no apologies for looking this good. Sorry.
Yeah, you look great. You look wonderful.
You look amazing, Moo. Together, we look fantastic. Thank you.
We're wonderful.
Thank you.
Perfect. Okay. Are you ready to get down to business?
I am so ready. Let's do this.
Okay. Buckle up, Boo. This one is heavy.
Oh.
I know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I told you it was the worst aviation accident in history. What did you think was going to happen?
I don't know. They're all the worst. I thought maybe this would be not the worst.
I know. Well, and also I saw that, so this is considered the worst single aviation accident in history, because when you look at things like 9/11, which had multiple planes involved, that would be a different category. So I just want to put that out there too.
Gotcha.
In case anyone's like, I thought it's really not that important, but I said it, so I figured I'd address it. Okay. So
important to distinguish. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome. So to start this day off, at 1:15 p.m. on March 27th, 1977, the Movement for the Independence and Autonomy of the Canaries Archipelago planted a bomb in a florist shop inside the Gran Canaria Airport. The resulting explosion injured 8, one seriously, but thankfully did not result in any death. In the immediate aftermath of the explosion and after threats of another attack, the airport was closed and incoming flights were diverted. Several of those flights were diverted to the Los Rodeos Airport, notably flight KLM 4805, a flight under KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, carrying 234 passengers and 14 crew, and also Pan Am Flight 1736, carrying 380 passengers and 16 crew. Both of these aircraft were Boeing 747s.
Big.
The very, very big double-decker planes. Yes.
To the Canary Islands.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah. So the Gran Canaria... Sorry, my accent is no bueno.
We'll forgive you.
Thanks. Is a decently large airport that can accommodate international flights like this. That Royal Dutch Airlines plane was coming from Amsterdam, and the Pan Am flight, I believe, was coming from, certainly from the U.S., but I think from L.A. potentially.
Okay.
That or New York. The 70s of Pan Am hubs.
We're so wild.
We're so wild.
Planes coming from New York, from LA. Who knew where they were coming from? But they were going to the Canary Islands.
Yes.
Okay.
But they were going to the Canary Islands. They were rerouted because of the airport being shut down because of the terrorist threat. So now our first problem comes in with the Los Rodeos Airport. This is a regional airport that was really struggling to accommodate all of this extra traffic resulting from the terrorist attack. There's only one runway at the airport and one major taxiway that ran parallel to it, with 4 short taxiways connecting the two. So imagine just 2 parallel runways, basically, is what they would have looked like, with 4 short little roads in between them that connected them. So coming off of the runway, you could turn through any of those.
Okay.
With so many large airplanes occupying such a small space, which is something they were not used to, departing aircraft were parked on the long taxiway, obviously making it unavailable for taxiing. As a result, departing aircraft were forced to taxi along the runway to position for takeoff, which is known as back taxiing or backtracking. So they would go all the way down the length of the runway, basically backwards for their purposes, or in the opposite direction, and then they would make a 180 turn and line up. It's not all that extreme, but it's apparently not what is typically done.
Makes sense. I'm imagining the little backer-upper thing pushing the plane backwards all the way down the runway.
That would be impressive.
The guy, the whole way.
That's not what happened, but that would have been comical for sure.
Yes.
Once the threat at Gran Canaria Airport was eliminated, the airport opened and everyone crammed into the Los Rodeos Airport was desperate to resume their regularly scheduled flights. They had schedules to keep. I'm sure the higher-ups were not happy about the delays. The Pan Am flight was ready to hit the road, but they couldn't access the runway because the KLM plane and a refueling vehicle were blocking the runway. The KLM captain, concerned with getting back on schedule promptly, opted to refuel at Los Rodeos instead of Gran Canaria to save time once they made it back to where they were supposed to be.
Okay.
The Pan Am flight only had 12 feet of wiggle room around the plane, so they had to wait until the refueling was done, which is something they were very irritated by.
I would also... Irritation is not my word. Concern that you would hit something is my word, but, potato.
So they were just going to have to wait. So when that refueling was done, the control tower told the KLM plane to taxi down the length of the runway and then make a 180-degree turn to get into takeoff position.
Okay.
The back taxiing that we talked about.
Yes.
While the KLM was back taxiing, the controller asked the flight crew to report when it was ready to copy the ATC clearance, or air traffic control clearance. Right after that direction was given to the KLM plane, the Pan Am flight was instructed to follow the KLM down the same runway and exit it by taking the third exit on their left.
Okay.
This might be a good time for you, Bailey, to go into the Wikipedia article I have linked in the show notes because they have a diagram of this. It's a little confusing.
In it. What am I looking at?
If you scroll down a little bit, there's a diagram under taxiing and takeoff preparations.
I see. Okay. This, if you're on our YouTube channel, this will pop up right now in the video, and go check out the show notes if you are curious and listening on the podcast.
Was that so hard?
Okay. Your terminology was confusing. I caught up.
Interesting you bring up confusing terminology. Hold on to that idea.
Great.
Okay. So KLM was given the instruction to basically get ready for takeoff. Pan Am was instructed to follow them down, and then before they followed them all the way to the end of the runway, though, turn left to take one of those 4 little roads off. Obviously, do not be on the runway.
Yeah. Oh, boy. There's a little, for those who aren't looking, we told you to look at the diagram, but if you're not, there's a red star that doesn't look like it indicates anything good.
It does not.
On this.
The Pan Am crew was initially kind of confused by the instructions they were given. The airport's unmarked taxiways didn't make it any easier to find where exactly they were supposed to go. After finding the first 2 taxiways, they failed to find the third and ended up sort of overshooting it and stopping almost in front of the 4th.
Okay.
Now, here is our second problem. The Los Rodeos Airport is 633 meters, or a little over 2,000 feet above sea level. This means that the airport is frequently swallowed up by dense clouds that can almost completely eliminate any visibility. Unfortunately, today was such a day, and the airport was experiencing high-density coverage. When the Pan Am aircraft taxied to the runway, visibility was about 1,600 feet. As soon as they turned onto the runway, visibility decreased to 330 feet.
What?
Yeah.
Why such a difference? That's just how the fog was that day?
Yeah, just where this airport is and its elevation.
Gosh dang it. Okay.
Yeah. The KLM plane lined up on the runway in good visibility, but the cloud that had engulfed the Pan Am flight was drifting towards them at about 14 miles per hour. So they could see a little bit ahead of them, but the Pan Am flight was already swallowed up by this cloud. They definitely couldn't see the Pan Am plane.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Here is our third and final problem. Right after they lined up, the KLM captain started to move forward. The first officer reminded him that they didn't yet have clearance from ATC. The captain basically said, "Okay, then ask for it," which is pretty sassy and rude.
Okay.
After asking for clearance, ATC specified a route for the KLM flight after takeoff. These instructions used the word takeoff, but did not explicitly state that they were clear for takeoff. It was like after you take off, you will do this.
Yeah.
The first officer read these instructions back to ATC and concluded by saying, "We are not at takeoff." The captain then interrupted the read back and said, "We're going." The captain was antsy and interrupted the first officer, and there was definitely some communication issue inside that cockpit.
Yeah. Also, wouldn't you... was this before there were, visibility standards? I thought you had to have, miles of visibility before you could take off.
It must have been, and that there are a lot of changes that came out of this, but I don't remember seeing anything about that, but that would be a very good outcome for this, is to change. Yeah.
I mean, I get nervous when, it's Dallas there's a foggy runway in Dallas, and there are 8 runways in Dallas where it's pretty confident there's not another plane there, but don't you want visual confirmation that there's not a deer on the runway or something? I don't know.
Yeah, you definitely would. You would for sure want those things. So, air traffic control had not given them the go-ahead. The first officer did not think they had the go-ahead, but the captain, for some reason, did.
Okay.
So the controller interacting with the KLM flight couldn't see the runway due to the dense clouds and responded with, "Okay." Because he said, "We're not at takeoff." So this guy said, "Okay." This is non-standard terminology and reinforced the KLM's misinterpretation that they were cleared for takeoff. The controller then added, "Stand by for takeoff, I will call you," which indicated that the controller was not clearing KLM for takeoff. Unfortunately, that vital later instruction was interrupted by mutual interference on the radio, resulting from a simultaneous radio call from the Pan Am crew. At the same time, the controller was trying to communicate to KLM that they were, in fact, not cleared for takeoff. Pan Am was letting ATC know that they were still taxiing down the runway. They couldn't find that third exit, and they were trying to figure out where to go. And they were trying to tell anyone who would listen, "We're on the runway, do not let anyone go." Unfortunately, both of those crucial messages would have made all the difference, and neither were received.
Oh, no. This red star on this diagram is getting more sinister.
Yeah. Mere moments later, the Pan Am captain shouted, there he is," as he spotted the KLM's landing lights through the fog. As soon as the Pan Am crew realized the KLM was approaching their plane at takeoff speeds, they applied full power to the throttles and attempted to turn into the grass to get out of the way. When the KLM pilots realized what was about to happen, they rotated the aircraft and attempted to clear the Pan Am flight by lifting off.
Oh no.
The KLM was already within 330 feet of the Pan Am and moving at 160 miles per hour when it left the ground. The nose landing gear cleared the Pan Am plane, but because of that turn that they made, it was the left side engines, lower fuselage, and main landing gear that struck the upper right side of the Pan Am's fuselage. This ripped apart the center of the Pan Am jet, while the right side engines crashed through Pan Am's upper deck right behind the cockpit.
Okay.
The KLM was only briefly airborne, and the impact sheared off the outer left engine, causing significant amounts of shredded material to be ingested by the inner left engine and damaging the wings. The plane immediately stalled, came down, and hit the ground 500 feet past the collision, sliding down the runway another 1,000 feet. Now, remember, the KLM had just refueled, so when it came down, it brought a fireball with it.
Well, weren't they both, like, really full?
The KLM had just refueled.
Okay.
Pan Am had not yet.
Because they had okay.
It took about 10 hours for that fire to even be manageable after this crash. In total, all 248 souls aboard the KLM plane were lost, as well as 335 souls aboard the Pan Am plane.
Everyone.
61 Pan Am passengers and crew survived the accident. But
wow.
I know, a total of 583 people lost their lives that day.
Was it the people in the back of the plane?
It was lower deck people on the Pan Am flight, who, when parts of the plane were sheared off by the KLM plane after the initial impact, they said, we were shocked, obviously, and then we just crawled out of any opening we could find.
Yeah.
And, like, jumped out of the plane and ran.
This reminds me, though, of the disaster you covered in Dallas, where that was another really big plane, where when you see the way that, like, it kind of broke in half, and you realize that how people there weren't slides. So when you're coming off this plane, you're like 30 feet up in the air. Like, it's just as dangerous to get out and jump down onto hard concrete as it is to potentially stay in this uncertain situation.
Yeah, completely. Yes, it's exactly like that. And when rescue, at first, rescue in the area or at the airport only attended to the KLM plane because the fog and the clouds were so bad they didn't know another plane was involved. They thought it just took off and then crashed back down. And so all these people were climbing out of the Pan Am flight and no one knew they were there. So
what?
Yeah. So eventually, it cleared and they were attended to, but yeah.
No fog. No fog. None. Zip. Nada.
Nope. So that was awful. Let's quickly stuff those feelings down and move on to what caused it and why it's not going to happen again.
Yes. How are we making sure this never happens again?
Investigators found the fundamental cause of the accident to be that the KLM captain attempted to take off without clearance. They theorized that he was perhaps very preoccupied with trying to leave as soon as possible so as to comply with KLM's duty time regulation and leave before the weather got even worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a stupid reason.
Yeah.
And I read in that Wikipedia page, actually, that when KLM heard that this had happened, they didn't know exactly what flight and who was captaining the flight or anything, but when they heard that one of their planes went down at this airport, they said, we should hire this captain to go investigate, and they didn't know that he had been killed, much less kind of caused this crash. So other major contributing factors include the sudden fog that limited the captain's and controller's visibility and the interference with radio transmissions. Other contributing but not major factors include the use of non-standard and ambiguous phrases, such as that okay. And take off when, it was said multiple times at different points. So, yes, the use of non-standard and ambiguous phrases, the Pan Am's failure to leave the runway as instructed, and the airport's attempt to accommodate a large number of large aircraft because of the terrorist incident at the other airport. So when the airlines conducted their own investigations, they also pulled a few things. There are a couple of bullet points from the Wikipedia page that I didn't put into my document, but I would just mention briefly. So obviously KLM didn't want to admit that
fault.
their captain might have caused this.
Sure.
They said the crowded airport put pressure on everyone, which is true. They said the sounds on the cockpit voice recorder suggested that during the accident, the Spanish control tower crew had been listening to a soccer match on the radio that may have distracted them. I do not know whether that's true, but it's something that they cited.
Fair enough. Don't want to be distracted, especially
Yes.
when conditions are challenging.
Yeah. So they also commented on how ATC's clearance was ambiguous, which is something that everyone agreed on, and that the Pan Am flight had taxied incorrectly, which was also true. But again, because of weather and the taxiways were unmarked, it's just a bad situation.
Yeah.
So KLM was really reluctant to blame their captain, but they ultimately accepted responsibility and they ended up paying the victims and their families.
That's good.
Yes,
Because,
right.
I would say that, it's, as with so many disasters, there is no one, singular thing. There were opportunities that compounded on each other to create a perfect storm for this disaster. However, it's great that they tried to make it right.
They sure did. Yeah, so there were some other speculations, but that's really what it boiled down to. So, what has changed?
Yes, because can I just point out, I am going on a plane tomorrow, so it would be really lovely to be reassured.
On Tuesday.
Yes. We'll have air travel coming up pretty shortly, so let's have some warm and fuzzies, Moo.
After this, huge changes were made to international airline regulations to introduce requirements for standard phrases and a greater emphasis on using English as a common working language. Words like okay and Roger were determined to be too generic and were replaced with a readback of the given instructions to show a mutual understanding.
Okay.
The word takeoff is only spoken when actual clearance is given.
Interesting.
So they'll say
that's a precious word.
Yes, they will say departure instead. So if you're ever like, hearing what's going on in the cockpit and they'll say ready for departure, they will wait for ATC to give them clearance for takeoff.
Interesting. So you have to hear cleared for takeoff. Otherwise, the terminology is strictly departure.
Yes.
Interesting. So I guess you might be actively explaining this, but just in case you don't explicitly say it for my brain, when an international, what's the organization that tackles this internationally? Because is it international? Right? Because
yes, that's a good question. I don't have that information. And in fact, I'm not even sure if the wiki page said exactly who was making these changes.
Yeah, because presumably, I would think everyone has something to learn here when an air disaster arises.
It does not benefit anyone to not be in on this plan.
Right, exactly. So it makes me wonder, but obviously every country works differently as to how their air travel is regulated. So I was just curious as to see if that would still fly, like using the airport like that in such a way. I'm like, I really hope I never come across an airport that's like taxi one way, take off the other. We'll just
Well, give me one more second,
'Kay.
And I'll get to that too. So additionally, and this is a really great change that needed to be made, the hierarchy that had traditionally plagued the cockpit was substantially downplayed and team decision making was encouraged. Because if you remember, the captain on the KLM flight multiple times had kind of sassed the first officer who had said, no, we're not ready, or don't you need clearance? He had interrupted him. So that team decision making that was encouraged is now known as crew resource management and became mandatory for all airline pilots starting in 2006.
The act of training or like this specific relationship?
Both.
Okay.
I think the dynamics of saying, your captain is always right, you always defer to the captain is not the case. They started encouraging first officers and other, people in the cockpit in a more subordinate position.
If you see something, say something. This is a planocracy.
Yes. Exactly. And so that was a really big change that was made, which is great.
Yeah.
And to your point about being able to handle the traffic that was diverted, to this airport, in Tenerife, a second airport was opened to accommodate more regional air traffic. And so they created the South Tenerife Airport, and this is now the North Tenerife Airport.
Okay.
And the last change they made, which accommodates more international travel.
I was going to say, yeah, if it's regional, like, good, but we need a place for those big boy planes.
Yeah. So the last change that was made was the Spanish government installed ground radar at what is now known as the Tenerife North Airport, which is here, where this disaster happened.
Right.
Had they had ground radar, they would have been able to see where the planes were, the weather issues.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm not familiar with, like, how ground radar differs from the radar that all planes are equipped with, right? Standard? Like...
Well, this was 77.
Oh.
So that's one thing. Again, this was an issue that was kind of glossed over a little bit, but because the weather was changing rapidly and they couldn't actually see where the planes were, they knew they needed more eyes on the ground in a way, and apparently ground radar is how they fixed that.
Interesting. So, I tried Googling ground radar versus in-air radar ? It did not yield a fruitful answer, so I'm not going to begin to read Google results. If you know, best friends, if you are an air traffic and airplane expert, please let us know how ground radar differs from what pilots see otherwise. Because I thought in air you could also see what was around you, objects, if you will. Maybe that's only in fighter planes. Maybe you don't need to see, like, because commercial airlines are supposed to, the 5-mile rule or whatever it is, they don't technically need to see that around them. But
you've got questions, I've got questions too.
Okay.
And that is the Tenerife Airport disaster.
Well, Moo, that was horrific. But as with so many disasters that are, thank you for sharing why these people did not die in vain, how we're fixing it so that this never happens again.
My pleasure.
Well, that's it from us, best friends. Thank you so much for listening this week, and we are so excited. If you missed the little not even a half episode we did last week, there was a little teaser, does the word peanut come to mind? A little
nugget
of what is to come next week when I do a disaster. So go give that a listen. Let us know what you think. And that's it. We hope you have an amazing day, week, time. We miss you. We hope you miss us. We cannot wait to be in your ears. Again, this time next week. Yes. Goodbye. Goodbye.